probably 80% of the people that come to see me are slicers. What most slicers don't understand, though, what is really causing their ball to curve from left to right. Most people that I see think that if they're slicing it, they're like this at impact with their face open when they strike the ball. But I see that occasionally, but what I usually see is that the handle is ahead of the club head at impact, and therefore the face is pointed to the right of the target line. So instead of being like this, they're actually like this. TrackMan will show that as an open club face, but it's really that the club head is behind the person. What I generally see with most players, especially as they get over the age of 30, is that their first takeaway with the golf club is not a turning motion with their body, it's a rotation motion with their arms. So their arms from behind, I watch them swing, and I can see a space here between their arms very soon on the way back. If they're going back correctly, you should not be able to see any space between your arms at this point in the backswing. Once I do this, that club is behind me, and it's almost impossible for it to ever catch up in the short amount of time it takes to impact. The only chance a player has from this position is to come over the top this way, trying to get the club head back in front of them. So most people think that the over the top or the outside in path is the cause of their slice, but it's usually the backswing that's the cause of the slice, and the over the top is just a symptom of that incorrect backswing. So a couple drills I like that are my favorite, I like to hold on with my top hand and with my bottom hand, put it on this side of the club, and I can feel what this motion feels like at the beginning. Feels like this, looks like this from behind. You'll see you can't see between my arms. If you see this, you can see between my arms. So that's a great drill. The other way I like to describe it is we need to swing the whole club in the same direction. The head of the club, the handle of the club need to move away from the target at the same tempo. When I rotate my arms, the head goes backwards, but my handle goes forwards. So when I do this drill, this end and this end move the same directions. My opinion, if you'll do a correct backswing, keep the club in front of you on the backswing, it'll go a long ways towards correcting your slice. I've been doing this for a long time. I think the best ball strikers do four things. They set up correctly, and that involves a lot of aspects, from distance away from the ball, which I think is the most important, ball position, how you hold the club, posture, aim, alignment, that's all set up. The second thing the best ball strikers do is they swing the club on the correct path, or they swing the shaft on the correct angle or swing plane. That's saying the same thing, just different ways of thinking about it. Club head path or shaft angle. The third thing the best players do is they keep the club face square during their swing. And the fourth and final thing they do is they keep the club in front of them. That is usually about the last thing that I would work a player on, but because it's pretty difficult to learn to do. But I do think it's the difference between an elite player and even a very good amateur player, is that the best players in the world do a very good job of keeping the club in front of them. If I was going to be tossed a 20-pound sack of sand and I caught it like this with my arms in front of me, I could probably handle it. I'd be strong enough to be able to maintain that bag in my arms. But if I tried to catch it to the side of me, one side or the other, I'm not strong enough to handle that. So for players searching for clubhead speed, you'll be much faster and much stronger if you learn to keep it in front of you as well. So it's a big deal. So what do I mean by keeping the club in front of you? Well, if I set up to the camera this way, facing you head on, this club head and this end of the shaft is in front of me. This is a pretty good drill, this little belly button drill. I can turn, and I can feel from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock what it feels to keep this club in front of me. The thing that I see with a lot of players is they either go this way on the way back and now the club's behind them to begin with, or they actually might be in a pretty good position to start, but then their arms go across their chest too much, and so the club is in effect behind them even though it looks like a good backswing position. But I need to have, if I hinge up and just slightly to the right as a right-handed player, and I turn back, these arms need to be much more out here in front of my chest. And where I see most players are across themselves like this, or they're literally just too flat and the club's behind them. So learn to keep it in front of you. Do this belly button drill a lot. And the more you think about having your arms 90 degrees to your shoulders as you're back here and through, that's a good way to do it. And no one is perfectly 90 degrees. The best players are about 15 to 17 degrees with their lead arm in relation to their shoulders. But most amateurs are almost 90 degrees across their chest, and man, that's a death move. Most instructors would tell most players that the number one thing in setup is how to hold the club properly. I don't think that's the number one fundamental. I think it's really important. I don't think it's number one. Number one, in my opinion, is learning to be the correct distance away from the ball. And that's a very difficult thing to do. The reason it's difficult, unless you're Bryson DeChambeau, you have 14 clubs in your bag, and they all have different lie angles, and they're all different lengths. So therefore, the distance away from the ball is different with every single club in your bag. And I think most players hit poor shots from being a poor distance away from the ball, and then they blame their golf swing on the poor shot, and they don't realize that it was probably just a simple setup mistake. The way to learn to be the correct distance away from the ball is to learn to use the club itself to determine that. I have a driver here. If I sole driver correctly, it'll sole slightly toe up. It's the only one, in my opinion, that'll sole just a little bit toe up. Once I sole it behind the ball, there's a couple really good checkpoints. I like this end to point at the player's belt buckle for a male, inch below your belly button if you're a lady. If I get too close to it, it's going to point lower than that. And if I get too far away from it, it's going to point above that if it's sold correctly. So if you watch on television with the tour players, you will see that almost all of them, this points at their belt buckle. A pretty good measurement from there is if you lower the end of the club, it should hit you just above the knee. And so for new players, I recommend that a lot, to do this measurement each time, and it'll get you the same distance away each time. When I was younger, 40, 50 years ago, most instructors would tell you that it's impossible to get too close to the ball, that the closer to the ball you are, the better. But if you look at the modern players that are the best players in the world, other than a couple exceptions, most of them you will see quite a space between this end of the club and their body, and you'll see quite a space here. The farther away I get, the more club head speed I can generate. And in a modern era where distance is important at the elite level, most of these players are getting farther and farther away from the ball. Victor Hovland's a really good example of that. So, distance away from the ball, sold flat, points at my belt buckle. That's true with a wedge, it's true with a 7-iron, it's true with a 3-wood, it's true with driver. Another good measurement is that points at my belt buckle. If I spread my thumb and finger, I ought to have about this much room from the end of the club to my belt buckle. And so that's another really good measure. We're at Old Hickory today. I give lessons to most of the members here. And if you're when the range is busy, you'll see everybody out here measuring on every shot. But it's a good thing to do, and it'll get you the same distance away every time. I'm always this distance away from the end of the club on a full swing, no matter the club. What changes is the club head. And so I see lots of people that are like this with driver, and then I see them like this with pitching wedge, and they wonder why they're not consistent. Improper setup and improper distance away is one reason. The other thing that I recommend, I don't think ball position is a fundamental. And what I mean by that is, a fundamental would be defined as something that every great ball striker does. Well, there's some of them that play the ball forward with every club in their bag. There's others that play everything more towards the middle with every club in the bag. If the best players are varying ball positions, then it's not a fundamental, it's a preference. What I think's important is you need to know where your swing is bottoming out, and we want to play the ball pretty much at the bottom of our swing. Now, you could debate that with irons, we'd like the bottom of the swing to be in front of the ball and driver behind, and I would agree with that. But if you're a pretty new player, try to find the bottom of your swing, and then that's where the ball should go. As a general rule of thumb, I find two different philosophies on ball position that work for different players. One, there's a lot of players today that play the ball, I'm right-handed, right here off my left breast. If they're using a pitching wedge or a sand wedge, they have a very narrow stance. That ball does not look very far forward. But as the clubs get longer, they start widening their stance with their back foot. So I might be with 7-iron here. You can see that makes the ball appear more forward. I may be here with driver. That makes it even appear more forward, but it really hasn't changed in relation to my chest here. That's a really good way to play. The modern turf we have zoysia here in Missouri, the modern turf where we're getting really good lies really helps to play the ball farther forward, which is a more powerful position. The other method of ball position that works is you can play sand wedge, pitching wedge, gap wedge, middle of the stance, and then just gradually start moving the ball farther forward, depending on what club you're using, until you get to driver, and it would be somewhere here off your left heel. And so I think having the ball in the correct place for you and having it in the same place every time is important to end up being a consistent player. The number one thing when I meet a new person and I ask them what's wrong with their game, they always say they're inconsistent. I claim that they're not inconsistent. They're doing the same things consistently wrong. It's just producing inconsistent results. And one of the main things is where this ball is at. Iron Byron's a machine that they test balls and clubs on. As long as that ball is on the tee for Iron Byron, it hits a perfect shot every time. But if I move the tee on Iron Byron, it's going to whiff the ball. Okay? Now this is pretty profound. But as humans, if I move the ball somewhere, I'm good enough to adapt to where I can make contact. However, I'll never be able to hit it where I want to hit it because of the incorrect position. So learn to get the ball in the exact same place every time, and you'll be a better player. I'm going to demonstrate, or try to anyway, one of the most common mistakes I see with players and why they slice the ball. And it's an incorrect backswing. So I'm going to set up the correct distance away, and but I'm going to make an incorrect backswing, and it should produce a slice automatically. So it's only about 100 yards right. Now what was wrong with that was I didn't have any rotation with my body. All the rotation on the backswing was with my arms. And because of that, the club got behind me, and it was impossible for me to make the club square up at impact, and I'm going to hit it to the right. So if I do that more correctly from here, we ought to be able to hit it a lot more down the line with a lot more correct backswing. So the other thing that I see that I didn't mention earlier that causes a slice is also incorrect setup. So I can set up with my stance too open to my target line, left of my target line for a right-hander. That also opens my chest and my hips too much at impact, and therefore leaves the club behind my body at impact, and it's also going to hit a slice or a block to the right. The other thing that I see a lot of, I have a lot of my students that hit irons great, especially short irons, and then can't hit driver. They slice it. It's usually, often anyway, a setup mistake of being too close to the ball with driver. You can make a mistake of being too close with a short iron. They're very up and down swings, and it's not too bad a mistake to be too close to the ball with a pitching wedge or 9-iron. But if I get too close to the ball with driver, it's no different than a pitcher in baseball throwing a fastball 100 miles an hour inside the plate and the batter gets jammed. The same thing happens to a golfer that sets up too close to the ball. They don't have room to swing, and therefore the club stays behind them too, and we're in this position at impact. So being too close to the ball produces a swing that looks like that, and I'm going to hit a slice every time from that setup, especially somebody that's built like I am. It's a disaster to be too close to the ball. Tall, skinny guys can kind of get away with it better than us short, fat guys can. But so keep that in mind if you're a slicer, that it impacts somehow the club's behind you. Could be your setup's open. I see people with their feet pretty good, but then they play the ball too far forward in their stance and their shoulders get to the left. And then the same thing happens. They're in that position at impact, and it's a slice or a block. And so the same thing, if I'm too close to the ball, I'm going to get jammed. Or I'm going to go like this, and then I'm going to hit low hooks. So being too close to the ball is a disaster with driver, because you can usually miss it both ways, high right and low left. Ideally, we're trying to swing the club in a circle around us, and we would like the club to strike the ball at the bottom of the circle, or with a driver, maybe we would bottom out just a little bit behind the ball and therefore hit it on the upswing. But pretty close to the bottom of our circle down here at the bottom is where we would like this club head to swing. One of the common mistakes I see, it's the catch-22 of golf. A guy named Heller wrote a book called Catch-22 way long ago, back in the 70s probably, that I was required to read in high school. But the catch-22 of golf is that if I'm a slicer and there's out of bounds or a lake down the right-hand side of the hole, and I'm a slicer, I have to aim left to keep it out of the water, to keep from hitting it out of bounds. But the way you hit a slice on purpose is to open your stance and aim to the left. So the guy that's a slicer, the more to the left he stands, the more the club stays behind him at impact, and the more he slices it. It's a never-ending cycle. It's the catch-22 of golf. I have to aim left to play for my slice. The more I aim left, the more I slice it. And you wonder why you're not getting better. The same thing happens to the hooker. Out of bounds left, water left. He's got to aim to the right. The more I aim to the right, the more I hook it. It's a never-ending cycle. And if you're playing for money, you're playing for score, you're playing for pride on the golf course, in my opinion, you better aim for your mistakes. But on the driving range, you need to learn to set up correctly in order to improve and in order to eliminate that. So, the golf swing's a circle. So nobody tells you why it's important to have your feet, your hips, and your shoulders parallel to your target line. The reason why it's important is the golf swing is a circle. So if I set up correctly, I can only turn this far back on my backswing. 90 degrees roughly with my shoulders, 45 degrees with my hips. That's with my feet on the ground. And on my follow-through, feet on the ground, I can only go to 90 degrees again, 45 degrees with my hips. My body is moving symmetrically on the backswing and the forward swing. If it does that, my club can swing symmetrically on my backswing and my forward swing, and I can make the correct circle motion. So, the player that ends up aiming this way, they can't turn very far back. I can't go any farther than this from an open stance. All their buddies say, you got to turn more. Well, they can't turn more from the position they're set up in. So here they are, they're stuck, but boy, on the way through, they can go unlimited over here. And what happens with that motion? The club drags behind me. There's no leverage in order to release the club head, and I'm doomed to be a slicer. And so it's very important that we learn to be feet, hips, shoulders square. The other mistake I see often with slicers is they get the ball too far forward in their stance. And they get too far forward because their path is outside in. And whenever your path is outside in, your club bottoms out way out in front of your foot. And so if that's where I'm bottoming out, that's where I got to play the ball. and so, or I'll top it. And so they play it too far forward, and then when they reach with their trail arm, then their shoulders are way to the left. And so, same scenario. Here I am, I'm too much left, the ball's too far forward. I'm going to swipe across it, and it's going to produce a left to right ball flight. So pay attention to these setup fundamentals, and it'll help you. Frankly, if you tend to slice the ball, I would rather see us play from a really closed stance like this. That'll freeze your hips in this position at impact, and your shoulders will stop turning, and it'll make your arms flip over, and you're more likely to at least feel what it feels like to hit hooks. If you're a hooker, you'd probably be better off standing like this on the driving range and hitting shots and feeling the ball go to the right because of an exaggerated setup to the left. So that's my advice. Learn to set up the correct distance from the ball like we've previously discussed, and learn from an alignment point of view, feet, hips, and shoulders parallel to your target line. You have a target line here. You might have to play the ball more forward in your stance than what it appears, but have your feet more of a 30, 40 degree angle to the target line closed. What happens from here is that as I rotate forward to strike the ball, my hips can't go any farther than this. My shoulders can't go much farther than this. And because of that, the club still has to go around, so it's going to rotate my arms. And so for me, I should be able to hit draws pretty easy. I like it a lot. Exaggerated. If you've always sliced it your whole life, don't keep doing the same thing you're doing. The same thing is just going to produce slices. Set up radically different into very much a hook position and learn how to hit hooks.